All modern reserve parachutes are of the ram air type, very similar to the main parachutes. What makes it so reliable is the way that it is packed, maintained, and deployed, as well as some design differences. Most reserves have 7 cells instead of 9 cells, and are slightly smaller than the main parachutes. However, most tandem reserves and some larger solo reserves are 9 cells. Reserve parachutes open more quickly and are 99.9% reliable, but they are just parachutes just the same. For this reason, maintaining a stable body position will help ensure a better opening, just like with the main parachute. Flying the reserve parachute is essentially the same as flying the main parachute, so all of the training that you will receive today for flying the main canopy also applies to your reserve. At this drop zone, the reserve parachutes are solid white. As mentioned in the equipment section, the reserve steering toggles are red as opposed to yellow on your main parachute. The toggles look the same and are stowed the same as on the main parachute, and the controllability check is done just the same as on your main parachute. All of the same procedures and flight characteristics apply to the reserve parachute. So you must fly your parachute to a safe landing area, avoid obstacles, and land in at least the number 2 position with your feet and knees together, prepared for a parachute landing fall. There are 2 classifications of malfunctions, high speed and low speed. Neither of these is safe to land and must be dealt with immediately. The reason for the categories is to give the skydiver a reference as to how much time he would have to deal with these malfunctions. Also discussed at the end of this section are unusual deployments of the parachute, which are not considered to be malfunctions. In these situations, the parachute has opened, but there is a minor problem with the open parachute. In most of these cases, they are easily corrected and the parachute can be safely landed. In all of these cases, there is adequate time to react and deal with the problem, but there is never time to hesitate or waste. High-speed malfunctions occur when none or only part of the parachute deploys. The amount of drag created is minimal, and generally this means the skydiver remains at or close to normal freefall speeds. Each of these requires a prompt decision and accurate use of your emergency procedures. A total malfunction occurs when there is no deployment of the pilot chute or main parachute. The total malfunction is considered to be a high-speed malfunction since nothing is slowing the skydiver's free fall speed. The total malfunction appears in the video to look very much like a skydiver in free fall, as the main parachute is still in the container and the pilot chute has not been deployed. Causes are usually that the skydiver has failed to locate the pilot chute handle, or the pilot chute cannot be extracted from the pouch to initiate deployment. This type of malfunction is very rare and is easily prevented by being aware of the pilot chute handle location at all times and by executing a smooth arch, sweep, feel, and throw sequence at pull time. Rushing and flailing at pull time does nothing to improve the situation, nor does it get the parachute open more quickly. In the event that no one, meaning you or your instructors, has been able to extract and throw the pilot chute, your emergency procedure is simplified in that all that is necessary is to arch and pull the silver reserve handle with both hands. A pilot chute and tow occurs when the pilot chute is deployed but the main parachute remains locked in the container. There are a variety of causes for this, and it is sometimes similar to a horseshoe malfunction, which is discussed later. The pilot chute and tow is nearly as fast as a total malfunction, but like the total, occurrences are quite rare. The only way you will identify this malfunction is looking behind you to see the pilot chute towing behind you, as you will remain in a belly-to-earth position. The pilot chute and tow malfunction is dealt with by executing a cutaway and pulling the reserve handle. The bag lock is also a high-speed malfunction, as you can see by referencing the free fall speed of the skydiver with the free fall speed of the photographer. The bag lock malfunction occurs when the main parachute is trapped in the deployment bag. Notice that the lines are unstowed, but the deployment bag is closed. Many line twists can occur, pinning the skydiver's head down, making it difficult to identify. This malfunction is dealt with by executing a cutaway and by pulling the reserve. A streamer malfunction is where the parachute is deployed but fails to inflate properly because the slider is holding the parachute closed at the top of the lines. The drag created by this partial deployment slows the skydiver's freefall speed considerably in relation to other high-speed malfunctions, but it would not be safe to land in any case. The streamer creates the illusion that the parachute is trying to inflate. This is one of the reasons that skydivers count during parachute deployments, so that sufficient time is given for the parachute to inflate, but at the same time, you do not wait too long before initiating emergency procedures. If your parachute looks like this after the full count to 3,000 and remains this way while checking the canopy, it is time to execute a cutaway and pull the reserve. The horseshoe malfunction can happen two ways. One is when the container opens prematurely, but the pilot chute was not extracted from the pouch and thrown. The second is when the pilot chute has been thrown, but it or its bridle becomes wrapped around the skydiver's body. Either way, it is another fast malfunction and may be the most dangerous because after cutaway, it can cause the main pilot chute and parachute to remain tangled with the skydiver. As mentioned earlier, a pilot chute and tow and horseshoe can be similar or even the same in appearance. If the skydiver recognizes that the pilot chute has not been thrown, a quick attempt at finding the handle and throwing the pilot should be made if altitude permits. Likewise, if the pilot chute, bridle, or something else has wrapped around a limb or elsewhere, it is permissible to make a quick attempt to free it, but only if altitude permits. If the pilot chute can be deployed or released from the skydiver's body, a good parachute deployment may still occur. If the pilot chute or bridle is around the arm or leg, pointing that limb upwards, then kicking or shaking it will often help it come off. Again, it cannot be emphasized enough that the skydiver will still be traveling at a speed near terminal velocity, and altitude awareness must be maintained while dealing with this or any malfunction. If you are unable to release the pilot chute from its pouch or your body, you must be ready to execute a cutaway and pull your reserve. Even if the horseshoe malfunction is cleared and the main parachute begins to deploy, it is likely that you will still have some other kind of malfunction with the main parachute and emergency procedures will need to be initiated. A low-speed malfunction occurs when all or part of the main parachute has come out of the container but has not taken the proper rectangular shape, is not flying straight, is not controllable, or is otherwise unsafe to land. These low-speed malfunctions are sometimes called partial malfunctions. The partial deployment of the main parachute will somewhat slow the skydiver's speed, which in turn gives the skydiver slightly more time to assess the problem. Regardless, a prompt decision and accurate use of emergency procedures is still important. Do not be made complacent by the term low speed, as the speed at which the skydiver would impact the ground would still cause severe or fatal injuries. The slider up malfunction is similar to the high-speed streamer in that it gives the illusion that the parachute will inflate at any moment. Notice, however, that some of the parachute cells are open and the slider is keeping the parachute from completely inflating. The severity of the problem will be determined by how far the slider has come down the lines. This picture could be just a slow deployment with a slowly descending slider. However, a parachute that looks like this for any length of time after deployment is likely to be experiencing a stuck slider and may not open any further. This is yet another reason for counting during deployment. If the parachute still has its slider hung up high on the lines after the full count of 3 and canopy check, then emergency procedures should be initiated. The slider up spinning malfunction is caused by the slider becoming stuck on the parachute lines on one side or the other during deployment. This is usually caused by small tension knots that have formed in the suspension lines that interfere, snag, or stop the slider from traveling down the lines. It is possible for the centrifugal force from the spin to cause the skydiver to become disoriented. The faster the spin, the more rapidly altitude is lost. This is the most common parachute malfunction and is easily recognizable. It also dictates that emergency procedures be initiated immediately because of the rapid loss of altitude that occurs when a parachute is spinning. The line-over malfunction is caused by one or more lines being wrapped over the top of the parachute during deployment. As you can see, the parachute is being choked off by the lines and is unable to fully inflate. Sometimes this malfunction can clear itself after just a few seconds, but the lines are more than likely to tighten as the parachute tries to inflate. The line-over malfunction is also likely to spin at a high rate of speed, eating up precious altitude. Emergency procedures should be initiated immediately. Another type of malfunction is caused when one or more lines is broken during deployment. The broken lines can be difficult to see by the person under the parachute. The parachute may look fully inflated, but could be turning slowly. It is also possible that it may be turning rapidly or not turning at all. The number of broken lines and the area in which they are broken drastically changes the parachute's flight characteristics. If one steering line is broken, a noticeable turn will develop shortly after opening. If other lines are broken, the result can be spinning, lack of control, inability to flare, or a high descent speed. If only one of the lines in the center of the canopy has broken, it may not severely affect the flight characteristics of the parachute at first, but it may cause an unacceptably hard landing. A controllability check to ensure that the parachute will fly straight, turn, and flare properly is essential. Damage to a parachute can be as severe as large holes and tears caused by a catastrophic failure to the parachute structure during the opening sequence. It can also be as small as a hole or tear the size of a baseball, which is caused from friction from the parachute lines against the fabric. Keep in mind that all parachutes have openings along the leading edge, and these should not be mistaken as holes. As a rule of thumb, if there is a hole as large as a volleyball, or if the skydiver can see all the way through the hole and see the sky above him, then it is time to initiate emergency procedures. Having both the reserve and main parachute deployed can occur due to the skydiver initiating the main deployment at a very low altitude. In this case, the AAD may activate, causing the reserve parachute to deploy along with the opening main. In some cases, two parachutes out can be caused by hard spiraling of the main parachute at an altitude which causes the AAD to activate. Both of these scenarios are easily avoided by very obvious means. First, always pull on time. Second, begin emergency procedures by 2,500 feet. And third, fly the parachute conservatively when below 1,500 feet. When both the main and reserve parachute have deployed, several things can happen. We will discuss the most and least likely scenarios and offer the best way to deal with each one. Keep in mind that virtually the only way to get in this situation is to have violated every rule governing pull altitudes, emergency procedures, and canopy flight that you will learn today. Even so, these two canopy out situations are not difficult to handle, providing that you recognize it and choose the best plan of action. If a skydiver finds himself with two parachutes open, generally one of four situations will occur. In most of these situations, it is best to land with both parachutes. The side-by-side and biplane scenarios are the most likely configurations, so they will be discussed in the most detail. In a side-by-side, the parachutes have both opened and are flying next to each other end to end. They will act like one wide parachute with the skydiver suspended between them. It is likely that the end cells from one canopy will be bumping against or at least be quite close to the end cells of the other parachute. The best way to steer this configuration is to steer the larger, more dominant parachute using only the rear risers. Steering input should be kept to a minimum, using only enough input to steer away from objects and into an open area. Generally, the side-by-side configuration will turn slowly on its own due to the difference in canopy types, but it will usually respond well to gentle rear riser inputs on the larger canopy. When landing, make no attempt to flare the parachute and perform a good parachute landing fall. In the biplane, both parachutes have opened and are flying in a configuration where one parachute is in front of the other and they are flying more or less in line. Since the lines of the reserve parachute are generally shorter than the lines of a main parachute, the parachutes will be at a slightly different height. This configuration appears similar to the wings of a biplane. In this case, it is best to only steer the parachute in front using the rear risers. Steer only as much as necessary to land in an open area. Again, there should be no attempt to flare and perform a good parachute landing fall. A less common but possible situation is the downplane. This occurs if both parachutes are open in a side-by-side but begin to fly away from each other and face downward towards the ground. This is easily recognizable because the parachutes are separated by a wide gap, usually 45 degrees or more. They both will face somewhat downward opposite of each other, and the skydiver will feel a significant downward speed. The best procedure is to pull the red cutaway handle to release the main parachute, then fly and land the reserve normally. It is possible to induce a downplane from a stable side-by-side configuration by using too much steering input. The time to deal with the downplane can be quite brief due to the downward speed and the fact that it may have happened at a low altitude in the first place. It is important to recognize and deal with the problem immediately. In some cases, after the main parachute has been released, the skydiver may not have time to unstow the brakes on the reserve and perform a flare, or the reserve may still be turning or decelerating. For these reasons, a good parachute landing fall is still very important. If the two parachutes are entangled and do not resemble any of these configurations, it is important to continue trying to inflate as much of the parachutes as possible for a softer landing. Sometimes, pulling in the less open parachute may help allow the more open parachute to further inflate. There is no sure answer to this scenario other than to keep trying to get as much fabric inflated as possible and never give up. Do not attempt to steer the parachutes or to flare when landing. A good parachute landing fall can make a big difference and should be executed when landing this as well as any of the other situations. Unusual parachute openings happen to all skydivers from time to time. There are several common problems that can occur but can easily be fixed. These are not generally considered to be malfunctions, but are normal opening quirks of ram air parachutes. These scenarios are covered in this section and will also be reviewed when discussing flight characteristics of the main parachute. Try to keep in mind that in all likelihood, each of you will experience a normal open main parachute and an uneventful landing on your jump today. However, we must always learn, practice, and prepare to deal with a malfunction on every skydive. A pilot chute can sometimes come back under the front of a fully inflated parachute after the opening sequence. At times it will snag or rest in the lines under the canopy. This can also occur after a radical stall maneuver is done intentionally by a skydiver. Therefore, a radical stall is probably best avoided even when doing your controllability check. Stalls are discussed at greater length later in this video. As you can see in this case, the pilot chute's location is not causing any problem since the parachute is rectangular in shape, flying straight, and is controllable. Only in rare cases would having a pilot chute under the main canopy make it uncontrollable. Line twists are a common occurrence, and probably 25% of you will have some on your first few jumps. They also will occur from time to time during your skydiving career. Fortunately, they are not a big problem and are easily remedied. Line twists are usually caused by air currents twisting the bag which contains your parachute during the deployment sequence. Line twists do sometimes just happen, but they are more commonly caused or made worse by a poor body position. Try to imagine the deployment bag launching from a flat, stable surface like this table. It most likely will come off straight and even. If that surface were slanted or moving around, the bag will not launch level. At first, the line twists make it seem difficult to get your parachute under control. After a few seconds of untwisting, the parachute can be easily controlled and will be flying normally. Think of untwisting the lines as untwisting the chains on a swing of a schoolyard swing set. If you grab your risers and spread them apart and kick in the direction that is opposite the twist, the line's twists will come out in virtually all circumstances. This parachute had many line twists, which is much more than normally experienced. Still, it only took a bit of effort to deal with them and end up with a fully functional parachute. Rarely are line twists a reason for a cutaway, and even severe line twists can usually be fixed in less than 1 minute. If for some reason the line twists will not come out by 2,500 feet, you should begin your emergency procedures. It is possible that there is something else wrong. Going any further trying to fix the line twists may cause you to end up too close to the ground for a safe and uneventful cutaway. Another common occurrence is a situation where the slider has come down far enough that it is not causing a malfunction, but it has not come all the way down the lines. Often it appears to the skydiver to be 1/2 to 2/3 of the way down the lines. This is easily dealt with during a controllability check using the steering toggles. Simply release your brakes and pump them several times smoothly to the number 3 full brake position, and the slider will continue down to its resting position where the lines meet the risers. At times, this may have to be repeated. If the slider has not come to a resting point that is closer to the suspended skydiver than to the inflated canopy, it is probable that there is some other problem. This decision, like all others, needs to be made by 2,500 feet. Enso closure will usually happen during deployment, but it can also occur during a turn, a stall, or during air turbulence. This is also easily corrected. As you can see, this parachute is not spinning and is controllable even with the end cells closed. Parachutes usually will continue to fly straight or turn only slightly if the closed end cells occur on one side. The cure for this is the same as the cure for the slider resting only halfway down the lines. Simply release your brakes and pump them several times smoothly to the number 3 full brake position. On a modern 9-cell canopy, a safe landing can still be made with 7 of the 9 cells open. However, it is important to follow the procedure to open all 9 cells because it is always better to land with a fully inflated parachute. An important sequence to follow is to check the canopy from top to bottom, then make corrections from bottom to top. In doing so, you will first make sure that the canopy is open and properly deployed. Then, if you have line twists, they can be kicked out, or if your slider is hung up, it can be pumped down. Finally, Enso closure can be dealt with. A controllability check is done after the parachute is open to ensure that it will fly straight, perform turns, and flare properly for landing. To do this, release the brakes, perform a 360-degree right turn, then a 360-degree left turn. Follow this with a practice flare, going from full flight to the number 3 full brake position, and then let the toggles back up smoothly. During this check, the parachute should remain stable, steerable, and square. It should also be fully inflated, intact, and under control by the canopy pilot.